I decided to visit my wife at her job as a CEO. At the entrance, there was a sign that said authorized personnel only. When I told the guard I was the CEO's husband, he laughed and said, "Sir, I see her husband every day. There he is, coming out right now." So I decided to play along. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought a simple surprise visit would shatter everything I believed about my 28-year marriage. My name is Gerald. I'm 56 years old, and until that Thursday afternoon in October, I thought I knew my wife Lauren better than anyone in the world. It started as such an innocent idea. Lauren had been working late again, pulling those 12 and 14-hour days that came with being CEO of Meridian Technologies. I'd been making dinner for one too many nights, eating alone while she texted me updates about board meetings and client emergencies. That morning, she'd rushed out without her usual coffee, and I thought bringing her favorite latte and homemade sandwich might brighten her day. The downtown office building gleamed in the autumn sunlight as I pulled into the visitor parking space. I'd only been to Lauren's office a handful of times over the years. She always said it was easier to keep work and home separate, and I respected that boundary. Maybe I respected too many boundaries. I walked through the glass doors carrying the coffee and brown bag, feeling oddly nervous. The lobby was all marble and chrome, the kind of intimidating corporate space that made me grateful for my quiet accounting practice. A security guard sat behind an imposing desk, his nameplate reading William. "Good afternoon," I said, approaching with what I hoped was a confident smile. "I'm here to see Lauren Hutchins. I'm her husband, Gerald." William looked up from his computer screen, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to something I couldn't quite read. He tilted his head slightly, studying my face, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "You said you're Mrs. Hutchins's husband?" His voice carried a note of confusion that made my stomach tighten. "Yes, that's right, Gerald Hutchins. I brought her lunch." I held up the bag, suddenly feeling foolish. William's expression changed completely. His eyebrows shot up, and then he did something that froze my blood. He laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a genuine, bewildered laugh that echoed through the marble lobby. "Sir, I'm sorry, but I see Mrs. Hutchins' husband every day. He just left about 10 minutes ago." William gestured toward the elevators with casual certainty. "There he is now, coming back." I turned, following his gaze, and watched a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit stride through the lobby. He was younger than me, maybe mid-40s, with the kind of confident bearing that seemed to own every room he entered. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. Everything about him screamed success and authority. The man nodded to William with familiar ease. "Afternoon, Bill. Lauren asked me to grab those files from the car." "No problem, Mr. Sterling. She's in her office." Frank Sterling. I knew that name from Lauren's work stories, her vice president who joined the company 3 years ago, the man she occasionally mentioned in passing, always in professional context. Frank this, Frank that, always business. My hands felt numb around the coffee cup. The brown bag crinkled as my grip tightened involuntarily. Everything in me wanted to speak up, to correct this massive misunderstanding, but my voice had completely abandoned me. William was looking between Frank and me now, genuine confusion creasing his features. "I'm sorry, sir, but are you sure you're Mrs. Hutchins' husband? Because Mr. Sterling here is married to her." The words hit me like physical blows. Married to her, present tense, not was married, not claims to be married, but a simple, matter-of-fact statement that shattered my reality. Frank paused mid-stride, his attention drawn to our conversation. When his eyes met mine, I saw something flicker across his face. Not guilt, not surprise, but recognition. He knew exactly who I was. "Is there a problem here?" Frank's voice was smooth, controlled, the voice of a man accustomed to managing difficult situations. Something cold and calculating passed through my mind in that moment. Every instinct screamed at me to explode, to demand answers, to create the scene this situation deserved. But a deeper wisdom, born from 28 years of reading people and situations in my accounting practice, told me to play along. "Oh, you must be Frank. I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. Lauren's mentioned you. I'm Gerald, a friend of the family. The lie tasted bitter, but it bought me time to think. I was just dropping off some documents for Lauren. Frank's shoulders relaxed slightly, but his eyes remained watchful. Ah, yes. Lauren's mentioned you too. Had she? What had she said? She's in meetings most of the afternoon, but I can make sure she gets whatever you brought. I handed over the coffee and sandwich, my movements mechanical. Just tell her Gerald stopped by. Of course. Frank's smile was perfectly professional, perfectly normal, as if we hadn't just had the most surreal conversation of my life. I walked back to my car in a daze, my legs moving without conscious direction. The October air felt sharp against my skin, but I barely noticed. Everything looked the same as when I'd arrived 30 minutes ago, but my world had fundamentally shifted. Sitting in the driver's seat, I stared at the office building through my windshield. 28 years of marriage. 28 years of sharing a bed, a home, dreams, fears, inside jokes that nobody else understood. 28 years of believing I knew this woman, completely. My phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. Running late again tonight, don't wait up, love you. Love you. The words that had once brought me comfort now felt like another lie in what was apparently a web of deception I'd been blind to. How long had this been going on? How many times had Frank been introduced as her husband while I sat at home, making dinner for one, believing her stories about late meetings and business dinners? I started the car and drove home through familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign. Our house looked the same, the red brick colonial we'd bought when Lauren first made partner at her previous firm, the garden she'd insisted on planting our second year there, the mailbox with both our names printed in careful script. Everything exactly as I'd left it, except now I knew it was all built on lies. Inside, the silence felt different. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of a home waiting for its occupants to return. It was the hollow emptiness of a stage set, a carefully constructed facade. I walked through rooms filled with our shared memories, vacation photos, wedding pictures, the ceramic bowl Lauren had made in that pottery class she'd taken 5 years ago. Had any of it been real? I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. My mind kept replaying the scene at the office, searching for clues I'd missed, explanations that might make sense of what I'd witnessed. But there was only one explanation that fit, and it was one I wasn't ready to accept. The front door opened at 9:30, just as it had countless times before. Lauren's heels clicked against the hardwood floor, her keys jangled as she set them on the hall table. Normal sounds of a normal evening, except nothing was normal anymore. Gerald, I'm home. Her voice carried the tired warmth I'd grown accustomed to over the years. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking every inch the successful CEO in her tailored navy suit, her blonde hair still perfectly arranged despite her long day. How was your day? I asked, the question automatic. She sighed, loosening her jacket. Exhausting. Back-to-back meetings all afternoon. Did you eat already? I nodded, studying her face for any sign of deception, any hint that she knew about my visit to her office. There was nothing. Her expression was exactly what it had always been, tired, distracted, but genuinely glad to see me. I brought you coffee today, I said carefully. To your office. Lauren paused in the middle of reaching for a glass. For just a fraction of a second, something shifted in her expression. Then she smiled. You did? I didn't get any coffee. I gave it to Frank to pass along. Another pause, so brief I might have imagined it. Oh, Frank mentioned someone stopped by. I had back-to-back meetings all afternoon, so I probably missed it. She moved to the refrigerator, her back to me. That was sweet of you to think of me. I watched her pour herself a glass of wine, noting how her hands remained perfectly steady. Either she was telling the truth or she was the most accomplished liar I'd ever met. After 28 years of marriage, I was terrified to discover which one it was. The rest of the evening passed in a surreal pantomime of normalcy. We watched the news together, discussed our weekend plans. went through the same bedtime routine we'd followed for decades. But underneath it all, a terrible new awareness pulsed like a second heartbeat. As Lauren slept beside me, her breathing deep and peaceful, I stared at the ceiling and wondered how many other lies I'd been living with. How many times had she come home from spending the day being Frank's wife, only to slip seamlessly back into being mine? How long had I been sharing my life with someone who was living a completely different one when I wasn't around? The numbers man in me started calculating. 3 years since Frank joined the company. How many late nights, how many business trips, how many times had she mentioned his name in passing, conditioning me to accept his presence in her professional life while he was actually inhabiting something much more personal? But the questions that haunted me most weren't about timelines or evidence. They were simpler and infinitely more devastating. Who was the woman sleeping next to me, and who had I been married to all these years? The next morning arrived with cruel normalcy. Lauren kissed my cheek before leaving for work, the same quick peck she'd given me for years. She wore her favorite perfume, the one I'd bought her for Christmas 2 years ago. Everything about her was familiar, comforting, exactly as it had always been. Except now I knew I was kissing a stranger. I called my office and told my assistant I'd be working from home. For the first time in my 15-year practice, I couldn't bear the thought of discussing tax returns and quarterly reports. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that grew cold while I stared at Lauren's coffee mug in the sink. She'd used it that morning, just like always. Had she been thinking about Frank while she drank from it? By noon, I found myself doing something I'd never done before. Going through Lauren's things. Not frantically, not desperately, but with the methodical precision that had made me successful in accounting. I started with the obvious places: her home office, the desk where she sometimes worked in the evenings. The drawers revealed nothing suspicious: work papers, company letterhead, business cards from clients I recognized from her stories. Everything was exactly what it should be for a CEO who occasionally brought work home. But then I found something that made my stomach clench. A restaurant receipt from Chez Laurent, the French place downtown where we'd celebrated our anniversary 3 years running, dated 6 weeks ago, for 2 people, $68.50. I remembered that night, clearly because Lauren had told me she was having dinner with a potential client. A female client from Portland who was in town for just one evening. I stared at the receipt, my hands trembling slightly. The timestamp showed 8:15 p.m. We'd talked on the phone that night around 9:30. She'd sounded relaxed, happy, describing her challenging but productive client meeting. I'd been proud of her for landing what she'd described as a significant account. But this wasn't a business dinner receipt. No alcohol charges that would accompany client entertainment, no appetizers or desserts that Lauren would order to impress a potential client. Just 2 entrees and a bottle of wine. The kind of intimate dinner I thought was reserved for us. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Lauren's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, honey," I answered, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. "Hey, I just wanted to check in. You sounded a little off this morning." Her voice carried genuine concern, the kind of caring attention that had made me fall in love with her 29 years ago. "Just tired," I said. "Didn't sleep well." "Maybe you should take a real break today. You've been working so hard lately." The irony of her suggestion wasn't lost on me. While I'd been working hard at my small practice, she'd apparently been working hard at maintaining 2 separate lives. "Actually, I was thinking about that dinner you had with the client from Portland. The one about 6 weeks ago? How did that work out?" A pause. So brief that most people wouldn't notice it. But after 28 years of marriage, I knew Lauren's speech patterns. She was calculating. "Oh, that. It didn't pan out the way we'd hoped. She decided to go with a local firm." Her voice remained steady, casual. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious. You seemed excited about it at the time." "Well, you win some, you lose some." I could hear typing in the background. She was probably answering emails while talking to me, multitasking the way she always did. "I should get back to this board meeting prep. See you tonight?" "See you tonight." After she hung up, I sat staring at the receipt. Either she was lying about the client meeting or she was lying about the dinner. Either way, she was lying. I spent the rest of the afternoon like a detective in my own life, examining familiar things with new eyes. The credit card statements I'd always glanced at casually, trusting Lauren to handle our finances since she made 3 times what I did. Now I studied them line by line. Lunch charges on days when she'd told me she was brown-bagging it to save money. Gas station purchases in neighborhoods across town, far from her usual routes. A charge at Barnes & Noble for $37.12 on a Tuesday afternoon when she'd supposedly been in back-to-back meetings. Lauren hadn't bought a book for pleasure reading in years, claiming she was too tired after work to focus on anything but trade magazines. But the most damning discovery came from her laptop. She'd left it open on the kitchen counter, something she'd been doing more frequently over the past year. I told myself I was just closing it to save battery, but my eyes caught a notification bubble in the corner of the screen. Frank Sterling had sent her a calendar invitation. I shouldn't have clicked on it. I knew I was crossing a line, violating her privacy in a way that would have horrified me just 24 hours earlier. But 24 hours earlier, I'd believed my wife was faithful. The calendar invitation was for dinner. Tonight. 7 p.m. at Bella Court, the Italian place that had become our special occasion restaurant. The place where Frank had proposed to me 17 years ago. The reservation was under Frank's name. My chest felt tight as I scrolled through more calendar entries. Lunch meetings with Frank that weren't labeled as business. Doctor's appointments that Lauren had never mentioned to me. A weekend spa retreat 3 months ago that she'd told me was a women's conference for female executives. But the entries that made me physically nauseous were the recurring ones. Coffee with F every Tuesday morning at 8 a.m., dinner plans every other Thursday. Weekend planning marked for this coming Saturday when Lauren had told me she needed to work. I was looking at a parallel life, meticulously scheduled and carefully hidden. Frank wasn't just her work colleague or even her affair partner. Based on these calendar entries, he was her primary relationship. I was the side note, the obligation, the inconvenience worked around. The garage door rumbled open at 6:15. Lauren was home early, unusual for a Thursday. I closed the laptop quickly, my heart hammering as I heard her heels on the kitchen tile. "You're home early," I said, hoping my voice sounded normal. She looked beautiful, I realized with a sharp pang. She'd refreshed her makeup, her hair was perfectly styled, and she was wearing the black dress I'd bought her for her birthday last year. The dress she'd said was too fancy for everyday wear. I managed to wrap up early for once. She moved past me to the refrigerator, her perfume trailing behind her. "I thought maybe we could grab dinner out tonight. It's been forever since we did anything spontaneous." The lie was so smooth, so perfectly delivered, that I almost believed it myself. If I hadn't seen the calendar invitation, I would have been thrilled by her suggestion. I would have rushed to change clothes, grateful for this unexpected attention from my successful, busy wife. "Where did you have in mind?" I asked. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe that new sushi place on 5th Street, or we could try something completely different." She was checking her phone as she spoke, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. I watched her type, wondering if she was texting Frank. Was she canceling their dinner, rescheduling, or was this part of some elaborate game I couldn't even begin to understand? "Actually," she said, looking up from her phone with apparent disappointment, "I just remembered I have that conference call with the Tokyo office. It totally slipped my mind." She shook her head ruefully. "Rain check." "Of course." The words came out automatically, but inside something cold and hard was crystallizing. "What time is your call?" 7:30. Could run until 9 or 10. You know how these international things go." She was already moving toward the stairs, toward our bedroom where she kept her work clothes. "I'll probably just grab something quick on my way back to the office." I nodded, playing my part in this elaborate deception. "I'll make myself something here." She paused at the bottom of the stairs, looking back at me with what appeared to be genuine affection. "You're so understanding, Gerald. I don't know what I'd do without you." The words that should have warmed my heart instead felt like ice picks. How many times had she said variations of this while preparing to spend the evening with another man? How many times had I smiled and kissed her goodbye, unknowingly sending her off to her real life? I watched her climb the stairs, listening to her movements in our bedroom. She was changing out of the black dress, probably into something more businesslike for her conference call. Or maybe into something entirely different for her dinner with Frank. 20 minutes later, she came back down wearing a navy blouse and dark slacks. Professional but attractive. Her makeup was perfect, her hair touched up. She looked like a woman preparing for an important evening, not someone settling in for a long phone conference. "I'll try not to be too late," she said, kissing my cheek. The same spot she'd kissed that morning, but now it felt like a betrayal instead of intimacy. "Take your time. I'll probably turn in early anyway." She gathered her purse, her laptop bag, her keys. The same routine I'd watched thousands of times, but now I knew I was watching an actress preparing to leave one performance for another. The house felt different after she left. Not empty, but haunted. Every familiar object seemed to mock me with its false comfort. The wedding photos on the mantel, the vacation souvenirs on the bookshelf, the coffee table we'd picked out together 10 years ago when we'd redecorated the living room. All of it was real, but none of it meant what I'd thought it meant. I made myself a sandwich and sat in front of the television, but I couldn't focus on anything. My mind kept circling back to the same impossible questions. How long had this been going on? How had I missed the signs for so long? And most devastatingly, had our entire marriage been a lie, or had something changed along the way? At 8:30, I found myself driving past Bellecourt. I told myself I was just going to the grocery store, that this route was perfectly normal, but when I saw Lauren's silver BMW in the restaurant parking lot, parked next to a dark Mercedes I assumed belonged to Frank, the last thread of hope I'd been clinging to snapped. They were in there right now, sharing the same kind of intimate dinner I thought was exclusive to our marriage. Was he telling her he loved her? Was she laughing at his jokes the way she used to laugh at mine? Were they planning a future that didn't include me? I drove home in a daze, the weight of my new reality settling around me like a heavy coat. My wife of 28 years was living a double life so complete, so seamlessly integrated that I'd been completely blind to it. The woman I'd thought I knew better than anyone was a stranger. The marriage I'd believed was solid was apparently just the cover story for her real relationship. But perhaps the most shattering realization was this. I had no idea how long I'd been living this lie, and I had no idea what to do about it. The revelation came 3 days